Thank you. Sego, everyone, good morning or good afternoon or good evening from wherever you are. My name is Cassandra Hill, but the only people who call me Cassandra are my mom when I'm in trouble, so everybody else calls me Cassie. I'm a Haudenosaunee woman and doctoral student at Athabasca University. I'm honored to be here with all of you today. My research explores how Indigenous women's safety, experience safety, voice, and belonging in online higher education and how digital tools, including artificial intelligence, might be guided by Indigenous ethics of care to support mental wellness and relational learning. The title of my dissertation is The Fire Inside the Screen, and for me, that fire represents both warmth and responsibility, the light that carries us through dark or isolating places in education. It reminds me that learning, like healing, begins with tending to relationships with ourselves, our communities, and the spaces we inhabit. Today, I'll share how this research grows from those responsibilities and relationships, and those guided by Haudenosaunee principles of peace, the good mind, and collective care. Now, Agoa, thank you for welcoming me into this circle of conversations. Next slide, please. Yeah. I come to this work, like I said, as a Haudenosaunee woman, but I'm also a teacher and I'm also a survivor of gender-based violence. I carry responsibility that reaches beyond research, responsibilities to community, to story, and to those whose voices have been quieted. The teachings of the good mind guide how I try to move through this work, with peace, with reason, and with a commitment to care. Before I speak about the research itself, I want to bring the story that led me here to my work. Like many Indigenous women, I carry lived experiences as a survivor of gender-based violence. And I also carry the quieter weight that follows it, the silence, the exhaustion, and the long process of finding my way back to voice. There was a time when school became that place that held me together. It offered rhythm, focus, and the promise of something beyond harm. Learning helped me breathe again. But safety doesn't come from a classroom alone. It depends on the relationships that surround us, how people, policies, and technologies make space for our full selves, the parts that are still healing, the parts that move slower, and the parts that need gentleness before performance. As I moved through higher education, I began to see how easily those systems, especially digital ones, could overlook that truth. Participation was measured through visibility, not through presence. Silence was misread as absence, when in fact it was care, reflection, and/or protection. For many Indigenous women survivors, that misunderstanding is not small. It's another kind of harm. It reminded me that digital spaces are not neutral. They can replicate the same colonial and patriarchal patterns that exist online or offline, sorry. That realization became the fire at the heart of my research, a desire to understand how digital learning spaces might become places of care instead of surveillance, guided by Indigenous ethics of relationship, accountability, and balance. Next slide, please. Thank you. After carrying that question of safety into my research, my dissertation asks, how can artificial intelligence be used in ways that honor Indigenous knowledge systems, support mental wellness, and create culturally grounded digital learning spaces for Indigenous women survivors? This question sits within a larger web of inquiry. How do Indigenous women who've experienced gender-based violence navigate safety and trauma in online higher educational spaces? And how can Haudenosaunee and other Indigenous methodologies guide both education and technology toward healing rather than harm? This research lives at the intersection of story and system. It's about trauma, but it's also about transformation, how education can move from performance to presence, from neutrality to care. It recognizes that mental wellness is not just emotional regulation, it's spiritual, relational, and communal. When one part of self is harmed, mind, body, emotion, or spirit, learning and belonging are affected too. At its heart, this work asks us how we can rebuild those balances off online. For Indigenous women survivors, digital classrooms can reopen wounds. Surveillance, policies, public discussions, expectations of visibility, all of which can be re traumatizing. But when rooted in Indigenous ethics, like the good mind or one dish with one spoon, and story as medicine, those same digital tools can become places of connection, reflection, and ceremony. So when I speak about generative AI, it's not as a machine problem, it's a wellness question. Can technology walk beside us in a good way? Can it hold story gently, respond to silence with respect, and protect data through community sovereignty? That's the fire inside the screen. A search for balance between innovation and spirit, for spaces where Indigenous women are not only safe, but fully seen, as learners, as knowledge holders, and as healers of their own stories. Next slide, please. This research is still in progress, as many of us are. I haven't yet conducted the participant interviews or virtual talking circles, but the foundation that I've created has been carefully built. The literature review maps the intersections between gender-based violence, trauma, mental health, and digital learning. It shows that while online education offers access and flexibility, it can also reproduce the isolation, surveillance, and emotional labor that many Indigenous women already face offline. Drawing on thinkers like Jenny Horseman, who writes about the impact of violence on learning, and Mary Baptiste, who remind us that education must restore spirit and meaning, I examine how digital spaces can either re traumatize or support healing. The theoretical framework that I'll share a little bit braids together Indigenous feminist theory, trauma theory, digital sovereignty, and two-eyed seeing. Guided by scholars such as Leanne Simpson, Agatha Straight, and Lewis, the framework asks how knowledge systems, both human and artificial, might learn to care, to listen, and to act ethically. It treats theory as medicine, not abstraction, as something that must be balanced to bring the community and learner together. The methodology that I'm working through is guided by Haudenosaunee research ethics and teachings like the good mind, the great law of peace, and the one dish, one spoon wampum. Inspired by Susan Hill's call for research that emerges from our own laws, and Sean Wilson's concept of research as ceremony, this work is guided by reciprocity and relational accountability. That story is not data to extract; it is a living relation that must be treated with respect. Looking ahead, the methods that I'll include in my research process is virtual talking circles, narrative interviews, and creative submissions, approaches that are shaped by Margaret Kovach's storytelling methodologies and Russell Bishop's Maori relational approaches. Each method is trauma-informed and culturally safe, allowing participants to choose how they want to share, whether that's through words, through art, through silence, or through ceremony. Together, these layers form the groundwork for the FIRE bundle braid circle framework, a living model that brings together Indigenous feminist theory, digital sovereignty and two-eyed seeing, and trauma-informed pedagogies. Each strand represents a commitment to mental wellness, cultural safety, and digital care. And I'll speak about this in a couple of slides, about 2 slides later, I think. Next slide, please. So when I'm talking about mental health, mental wellness, in a lot of our Indigenous cultures, we know that this is not separate from our learning. It can really be a place to find our learning. From what I've seen and lived, trauma doesn't just affect the mind. It reshapes memory, it reshapes voices, and it reshapes the ability to be present. In many Indigenous ways, in our Indigenous ways of knowing, balance, what Haudenosaunee teachings call the good mind, is the foundation of health. When that balance is disrupted, our capacity to think, to speak, and to connect is also shaken. As Brandt reminds us, the good mind calls us towards peace, reason, and compassion, principles that are too often absent in digital education systems. During the first chapter of my dissertation, I describe how education can become both medicine and mirror. Yet online classrooms frequently measure engagements by speed, visibility, or productivity, typing speed, camera presence, and participation. For Indigenous women survivors, those expectations can misread care as absence or silence as disengagement. As Meeks and Millen argue, colonial institutions continue to reproduce trauma through systems that privilege performance over those relationships. I also have been looking at how technology that's meant to help can become gatekeepers. During one of my courses, we're asked to play with AI to ensure that we understand how it works so that when we become teachers, we can use it in a good way. And so when I was using AI to help mm, refinish, I guess, my personal story of survival, it flagged my words as unsafe. That small moment revealed a much larger truth that digital systems that are around us are not neutral. They carry assumptions about whose voices are acceptable and whose pain can be processed and whose must be visible. From a Haudenosaunee and broader Indigenous lens, that wellness is relational. Kovac and Wilson teach that knowledge and healing emerge through relationships, accountability, and ceremony. When trauma disrupts that relational web, healing must also be relational. Digital learning environments must therefore become spaces where care is reciprocal, not extracted, where story is honored, not moderated into silence. So this project that I'm working on asks, could generative artificial intelligence be reimagined to support that kind of care? Could it check in gently, not to monitor, but to accompany? Could it offer asynchronous, non-invasive supports that honor body, mind, time, and emotion? Could it be programmed not to police presence, but to protect it? I ground this inquiry into authors such as Leanne Simpson, who reminds us that land and learning are inseparable, and that um, survivorance, sorry, is an act of active presence. Those teachings shift how we think about digital mental wellness from treating symptoms to restoring relationships. Ultimately, mental wellness in this work is not just an individual state, it is a collective practice of presence. It asks us what kind of digital worlds we are building and whether they make room for women who are carrying both knowledge and pain. Next slide, please. Thank you. This framework that I created based on all the research that I've done so far is called the Fire Bundle Braid Circle. It's not a model applied after the research, it's the living structure that emerged from it. It brings together everything I've carried so far: story, theory, ceremony, and community. It braids four theoretical strands: Indigenous feminist theory, digital sovereignty, two-eyed seeing, and trauma-informed pedagogy, with four practice-based tools: virtual talking circles, story as bundle, digital bundle, which is a teaching that's adapted from Jennifer Wagamin's, reflective accountability, which is grounded in Russell Bishop, Margaret Kovach, and Sean Wilson's idea that research is the method. These strands and practices come together like sweetgrass, each with its own role, tension, and medicine. Each strand has its own spirit. Indigenous feminist theory is the flame, centering Indigenous women's voices, um, and what Millen calls felt theory, recognizing emotion and story as knowledge. Two-eyed seeing is the vision, teaching us that to hold Indigenous and Western knowledges together without collapsing one into the other. And digital sovereignty is the container, protecting how stories live online, guided by OCAP and CARE principles. And trauma-informed pedagogy is the breath, slowing us down, grounding the work in care, consent, and safety. Encircling these strands are the four practices, the actions that hold the fire. The virtual talking circles are ceremonial containers for voice, silence, and truth. Story as bundle treats narrative as sacred, alive, and relational, not data to be mined. The digital bundle ensures that even when story moves through a screen, it remains sovereignty and ceremonial. And reflexive accountability keeps me grounded, returning to the fire again and again to ask, am I listening in a good way? This isn't a finalized model. It's a living framework, one that breathes, listens, and evolves through my engagement with participants. It will grow with each story shared, each silence held, and each teaching returned. In the next slide, I'll show how this framework begins to take shape, not as theory, but as a circle of care and accountability that can guide digital wellness and AI design. Next slide, please. Okay, at the heart of the research that I've been doing so far, there's a question that I've held close. What would it mean for technology to hold us gently? Echoes of Us is my response to that question, a digital bundle emerging from the same teaching that shaped this dissertation. It carries the fire of the Fire Bundle Braid Circle into a new form, one that exists within the screen but remains guided by relationship, ceremony, and care. Echoes of Us is not a product, it's a living space designed with, for, and by Indigenous women who have survived harm and found strength in story. It's being co-developed by our team, and I serve as its CEO, ensuring that the spirit of this work remains grounded in community, not corporate logic. Our company is building Echoes of Us as a platform rooted in Indigenous ethics, where digital tools act as companions, not controllers. It's built on the understanding that healing doesn't always happen in public or on a schedule. Sometimes it happens in quiet reflection, in writing a few words down, in revisiting a teaching, or in being witnessed without judgment. The platform holds four interconnected purposes, all rooted in the same Haudenosaunee ethics that guide this research. Story is healing, creating space to record, revisit, and protect personal stories in ways that honor sovereignty and consent. Connection without extraction, using digital tools not to track or analyze, but to accompany, to offer care without intrusion. And cultural grounding, integrating teachings like the good mind and one dish with one spoon as principles for balance, accountability, and relational safety. And finally, AI as co-agent, exploring how artificial intelligence can act like a helper, not a watcher, checking in softly, learning from context, and holding space for reflection rather than for performance. Each feature of Echoes of Us is designed around a simple idea that presence is enough. It's not about productivity or metrics. It's about feeling seen, supported, and connected, even across digital distances. In this way, Echoes of Us becomes a continuation of ceremony, a space where the fire inside the screen burns with story, not surveillance, with relational accountability, not data extraction. This is what the future looks like to me. Not AI that replaces human connection, but AI that learns to walk with us, gently, ethically, and in rhythm with our stories and our healing. Next slide, please. This work is still unfolding. It's not a conclusion, it's a continuation. What I share with you today is not something finished, but something alive, a fire in motion. Each strand of this research, the stories, the teachings, the questions, continues to move, change, and breathe with me. It's grounded in my lived experience as an Indigenous woman and survivor, guided by Haudenosaunee teachings, and carried forward by the relationships that continue to shape it. I hold this work as both ceremony and responsibility, a reminder that research is not about control, but care. Each time I return to it, I'm reminded that healing, too, is not linear. It's cyclical, like seasons, like breath, like the way stories find their way back to the fire. Okay, next slide, please. As this journey continues through the Echoes of Us platform, through community collaboration, through story and reflection, my hope is simple, that something better is possible, that our digital worlds can become spaces of safety, reciprocity, and relationship, that the next generation of Indigenous women will be able to log in without shrinking who they are. So today I share this work in gratitude to the women who've shared their story with me so far, to the mentors and communities who carried me here, and to all of you for listening with heart. Now we'll go. Thank you for walking this path with me. And then the last slide is just some of the great authors that I've been able to pull work from, some of which I've been able to meet in person. So it's great. Thank you.
For having me then, everybody. My name is Briony Martin. I'm a psychotherapist and a clinical supervisor and also an educator in the field of counselling and psychotherapy. And I work training therapists and counsellors at Warwick University and the Open University in the UK. I feel really kind of humbled coming after you, Cassie. I really enjoyed that presentation. There was so much that I was thinking, I must read that. I must add that to my lit review. Brilliant. Thank you so much. And it would be great to be able to have your slides. My presentation is a bit different because I'm not presenting my research as any kind of finished product. As I'll explain, it's been quite a kind of deeply kind of reflective and challenging process, even getting to the stage I am in my research. I'm at the point where I'm about to submit my ethical approval form, and I'm doing a professional doctorate as opposed to a traditional PhD, which involves a taught element. So I've been engaging in a lot of kind of taught element preparation for my study. So my title, Who is This White Woman, is actually a direct quote from somebody who, when I entered a space like this and started presenting my research, that was their response. And it's very much my kind of struggle with entering the space of decolonization, and I'll trouble that term in a minute, as a kind of privilege holding white researcher, and really wanting to kind of engage with my student and my clients' perspectives who have global majority identities, but really conscious of the inherent kind of othering in that effort. So on the one hand, trying to attempt a kind of good enough allyship, and on the other hand, really being conscious of the kind of performative othering aspect of me doing that. So it's taken me ages, and I'm coming here really just wanting your help and advice and your feedback. Yes, your questions, but also any comments, any kind of blind spots you think I may have in this. I'd be really open to hearing that. So the next slide this is the actual title of my study. It's News Stories from the Training Room. How are global majority counselling and psychotherapy trainees experiencing therapy training? And it's a participatory narrative inquiry. So as an educator, I'm very conscious of how dominated our curriculums, our practices in training counsellors and psychotherapists are by kind of white Western theories and theorists. So I'm not a great fan of the phrase dead white men, but the reality is most of the famous theorists in counselling and psychotherapy are dead white men. And this came to my kind of personal attention very strongly back in 2020 during COVID, with the murder of George Floyd in America, and the kind of resurgence or continuing surgence of the Black Lives Matter movement. And that sent me on a personal kind of journey of looking at my whiteness, really, and engaging with critical race theory, critical whiteness studies, really looking at my white privilege and how that was kind of damaging me and others, particularly if it was done in a kind of, if I was holding that in an unexamined way. And I started to kind of be interested in what would therapy and therapy training look like if it wasn't kind of dominated by these white Western perspectives. And from there, thinking about what are the actual experiences of my students, what's it actually like for them engaging in this training, in this context, in the UK, and what do I need to be learning, what do I need to be hearing, if you like. I think at first I went in with right, let's decolonize psychotherapy training and let's fix it. And I realized that was a very kind of white kind of way of approaching things, that it's not about me coming up with any answers. It's about me kind of listening. That's where I've kind of got to. I was also really influenced by something that happened in the UK in 2020, and this was an open letter written by one of my colleagues in the profession here, psychotherapist Anthea Benjamin. In response to George Floyd's death, she wrote an open letter to our profession in counselling and psychotherapy, and among other things, she said this: we in the therapy community need to be actively engaging with our own institutions, questioning how we still maintain and comply with a structurally racist society. And I think, that call coming out from our profession, it put Anthea in a really, she really kind of stood up there and put herself forward into that space. And I think there was a kind of movement here to kind of get behind that and engage with her call and respond to it authentically. So that's the kind of background to why I am doing this research. So how am I doing it? I am doing it using a methodology called participatory narrative inquiry. And I don't know if anyone here is familiar with that or has used this. I'd be really interested if any of you have, to kind of hear your experience. And Cassie, I think this has some echoes from the type of way you're engaging, the methodologies you're using as well, maybe. Participatory narrative inquiry was developed by two researchers called Rachel Kohler and Cynthia Kurtz, and they actually come out of the positive psychology movement. and it's what's known as a storying methodology. So it emphasizes narrative as data. So the story is the data. And the second huge thing, and this is really the reason why I've chosen this, is it emphasizes participant involvement in the interpretation of the data. One of my personal frustrations with all methodologies, even in qualitative research, has been how it all comes back to what the researcher thinks. And I know on some level we can't avoid that, particularly in doctoral projects. But I felt frustrated that there was not more opportunity to allow participants to say what the meanings were from their own data. And at first, I looked at doing a full blown collaborative inquiry, but realized that I felt, not arguably not possible in a doctoral project where the researcher ultimately has to own the research in their own name. So I pulled back slightly from collaborative inquiry into participatory narrative inquiry. So I'm going to be bringing together an inquiry group made up of counselling and psychotherapy trainees who hold global majority identities. And the process will proceed in 3 steps. I've never done this before, so I'm learning. So this is what I understand of it so far. The first step will be gathering together stories and experiences and sharing of those. The second step in the group will be a process of meaning making. Kohler and Kurtz use these, I love these words, churn, forage, contemplate. I love those really sensory, really kind of participatory, active words for the way that we might engage with those stories and kind of move them around, explore them with a view to kind of pulling out or allowing to emerge kind of some meanings, and then move towards a kind of development of any shared meanings or any kind of dissonant meanings. And then the third phase, and I also really excited about this bit, is the return phase. So this is the where the stories and the shared meanings are returned to the community, in this case the therapy community, and this is the action part of it, where it's like, these are our stories, listen, listen to our stories. And that hopefully will go beyond my own thesis, but obviously will include my thesis. And again, back to the inherent conflict I have in the heart of doing this research is who am I ultimately really to say anything about these stories that I've found? But I'm going to try and do it anyway, and I'm just going to try and tolerate the conflict that I feel around that. So participatory narrative inquiry comes from a critical realist lens. I guess it believes that there is a real world with real injustice and people have real experiences, and the way we know about that is to hear people's stories. And also the other big narrative school that's influenced it is narrative inquiry. Again, the idea that the story is the data. And for me, and I'd be interested to hear whether you guys agree, I feel this methodology is well placed to enable a kind of hearing of hitherto marginalized stories, and hopefully for me to kind of counter the outsider researcher position that I hold and the kind of power holding position that I hold. And frankly, not just I, but any of us as researchers, in being the researcher, we hold that power. So there's something about acknowledging that and trying to mitigate and counter that. And as I was coming into this GoGN space for the first time, I was thinking, well, how is this related to GoGN's kind of ethos around open access? And I'm not sure it is directly, but indirectly, I think it's interesting to explore methodologies which are open rather than closed in the way they proceed, i.e., open to participant kind of ownership, if you like, and open to participants taking the data themselves and doing what they want with it. That I'm not sure if that fits with the definition of open access, but I feel that it does fit with the word open. So thank you for listening to that. I'm just going to share with you some of my key challenges, and that's where I'm going to stop, because I'm coming to this with a lot of questions rather than answers, and very much still in a grappling phase with this. And I would really value your input after I've shared that. So this is my last slide. From the beginning of this, hang on, what happened to my slide on decolonisation? Oh, here it is. From the beginning of this, I've been really conscious that there's a risk of colonising the decolonising space. Okay, so my attempt at allyship and coming into this as a kind of outsider researcher has, I think, a risk of me replicating some of the dynamics of colonization in a really unhelpful way. And yeah, I'm still open to ideas about whether I need to stop, whether it's inappropriate for me to even be doing this, or if it is okay for me to be doing this, whether how I do it in a way that mitigates about that. And even in raising this, I'm also realizing it's kind of making it about me. So you can see the kind of the conflict, and I'm just trying to share that honestly. That is how I've experienced it. I'm really aware in using the word decolonization. I've been really influenced by this paper by Tuck and Wang called Decolonization is Not a Metaphor. That decolonization means, returning colonized lands to indigenous control. It doesn't really mean anything other than that. And so metaphorically, I think we have to be really careful when we're throwing that term around, because are we really returning anything to indigenous control, or are we really doing that when we say we're doing decolonizing work? So I'm really aware of that, influenced by the work of Franz Fanon, The Wretched of the Earth, where decolonization was actually about the struggle to overthrow the colonizer. It wasn't just about rewriting some curriculum. So I'm really aware of not using that word, decolonization and metaphor, lightly. That said, influenced by Linda Tuai Smith, whose book Decolonizing Methodologies I'd really recommend, and I'm sure you guys have come across it, that there's something about attempting a kind of a methodological decoloniality. That's what I'm trying somewhat candidly to do by choosing a kind of participatory methodology to do this research. And I've already shared with you the limitations of an individual doctoral project, that wanting to do participatory, collaborative, open, inclusive research, and yet having to write something that will ultimately come in my name and ultimately, I guess, benefit me from a kind of career perspective. So it's really weird talking to the screen because I can't see anyone's faces as I'm giving this presentation. I'm not speaking from a script, so I've kind of just hopefully given you quite an authentic kind of insight into where I am with this, and I would really, really value people's feedback. My references are there, and over back to you. I'll stop sharing.
Yeah, my name is Joel Nakitare. I'm a member of GoGN, and most specifically, I also belong to the COEC, the newly established hub in Kenya. I'm a librarian by profession, and I've been doing my PhD at Technical University of Kenya. I look forward to graduate actually next week. So before I give my presentation, just that I joined COHEC a bit late in my COHEC and both GoGN a bit late in my research, and that's why I'm looking at it almost from a point of reflection, just to see how my thesis can fit into the whole thinking of GoGN, and most especially as I plan for my future research, as I embark on my new lines of uh, activities. I really want to focus on how can we use data to power the whole initiative of open education. So I've arranged my presentation into three main sections. The first, just to give us an overview to appreciate where we're coming from. Then I'll quickly share, run through a bit of the findings that I came up with in my thesis. and then conclude by looking at what does this imply, the implications of the data management practices on open education resources. What is it that needs to be done? And we finish at that point. So allow me to start with the very, very basic, why GoGN exists, why all of us are here, is to literally try to ensure that education is free, that is affordable, and that there are no barriers for anybody who would want to access that particular education. And in the middle of it, we are talking about education, open education resources, which, if they were available, then the aspect of exclusivity, discrimination will not be there. We'll be able to bring everybody on board. So it's a good initiative, and I really believe this is the way to go, or this is the way to make this world a better place if all of us took up the rallying call of making education as open and accessible as possible. So just to appreciate what was I dealing with in my thesis was specifically on research data management. And I was basically looking at both the raw data that we collect from the field, the processed data that we already have, how do we manage it, most especially post our research. And just to mention that research data is a valuable intellectual asset that all of us, as we go on with our thesis, we really need to take note of that it is a valuable asset that if we lose, then we are likely not to transact. Some have argued that it is the currency in the intellectual world. And in this presentation, I'm arguing that it is the oil that powers the education, that powers the AI, that powers collaborations, innovations, and everything that happens around us in this world of today. Without data, we can't do much. So just again, to appreciate the context, why am I emphasizing on this issue of data management? I've picked on the current debate, the AI, thanks to the earlier presenter, just talked about AI. In this age of AI revolution, we realize that AI can really assist us to make education available and open as much as possible. Why? Because of the speed, because of the possibility to make learning very personalized, localized, and more so in the context. You can even use it to translate and the likes. But AI works on the models that fully rely on the data that they have. In the background of AI, there's one major challenge, the scarcity of adequate and quality data. If we had adequate and quality data, we will have the full potential of AI, most especially in making education as open as possible. However, despite the fact that all of us appreciate that research data is very important, universities all over the world, and especially in the global south, they generate huge volumes of data, yet there's very limited evidence on how they are managing this data. So the big question in my thesis was, where is our research data? Where are universities taking their data? That is my thesis was about that. And I had 5 objectives, but for the purpose of this presentation, I'll only mention 3. I'll limit myself to the 3. The first, I looked at the maturity of the research data. I tried to examine the enablers of RDM in our universities. And the last was to propose a framework that can be used in our universities to improve how they manage their research data. So I did my research in 3 levels. First, before I started, there was very little research that I could get to inform my literature review. And therefore, I started at a very basic point, just to do a scoping review, content analysis, looking at the websites, individual universities, what is it that they are saying or doing about data. Then the second level, in my first level, as I was doing the content analysis, I discovered one database that had huge volume of data sets. So I accessed it. I managed to extract the data sets that were affiliated with Kenya and try to analyze using an informametric analysis. And the last bit of my thesis, I did a survey of 6 universities or combined with case studies just to understand where are they in terms of data management, in terms of enablers, the challenges they are facing, and using these 3, I propose a framework. So I'll just run through, and luckily all the 3 levels, the papers are published. You can access, I can share with you, but I can just run through very fast a bit of the findings that I came up with. The first, when I did the scoping review of the early indicators, I established that researchers and institutions in Kenya, the specialized research institutions and researchers in those institutions were already doing a bit of data management, but there was very little evidence of research data management at the university level. Again, the little indicator that you could see on data management, most of it was happening at the personal level, and there was very little that was happening at the institutional level. So a few of the indicators that you could see, there were data repositories. Actually, there were 6 data repositories in the whole country. And then there were a few policies in a few institutions, and you could also see some diverse data sets on different platforms from Kenya. Notable champions that the scoping review identified: the first, Cambridge, an institution that is specialized with the medical research. The second is on livestock, and the third one is a government entity. But the 3 of them showed strong indicators of good practices of data management. So the main findings in this part of the first part of my research was that RDM activities at the institutional level, especially universities, were very limited. And this implies that RDM in Kenya was still, especially in universities in Kenya, was still at infancy stage. The second part of my thesis, as I said, I had identified the dimensions database, which had quite a lot of data sets from different countries. And I tried to extract the data sets from Kenya and analyze to establish the patterns. So by the time I did the analysis, there were 45,737 datasets from Kenya. And these datasets, when analyzed, the oldest was 1952, and the most recent was 2023. I did the analysis, and this is what I established, that data sets, the volume of data sets has been increasing, and most especially you can see the spike between 2018 to 2023. This aligns with the global open science trends, and which most funder was demanding that researchers who are funded should provide evidence of the data that they collected. Interesting, the country of origin. When I analyzed this data further, I established that the data on Kenya was managed by institutions and researchers from the country and outside the country, almost to 50-50%. That most of the data that we were seeing being managed by researchers in Kenya were from very specialized research institutions. If you check this list, I just tried again to analyze and pull a list of all the research institutions that were listed in the 45 datasets and analyze the datasets associated with those individual institutions. From this list, you can see there were only 3 universities. And among the 3 universities, still the volume compared to other institutions were very few. So in Nairobi University, the biggest university in the country, there was only evidence of 3 researchers who are managing their research data in that particular database. The main finding, again, I've already alluded to this, that the data management that was already happening at a minimal level, at that minimal level, it was a split of 50-50. Produced and managed by researchers and institutions in Kenya, and produced and managed by researchers and institutions from outside. Then the third level of my thesis where now I went to the individual universities. I selected 6 universities and did quite in-depth analysis, talking to the individual researchers, the different stakeholders, that is the librarian, the ICT people, the research directorate, just to understand where are we in terms of data management. So again, just a few findings that came up. Number one, that there was notable effort of effective research data management at individual researchers level. Every researcher, when you ask them about where is your data, even though there could be majority were in the wrong places, like maybe the personal computer, email, at least they know where data was. Most of them are admitted to have put in place strategies to have good data and the likes, but there was very limited evidence of data management at the institutional level. I'm moving a bit faster because of time. And then based on the findings of the 3-leveled research, I proposed a framework that can help university move from ad hoc practices to institutionalized and sustainable research data management. The first was a move that we will be able to move from uncoordinated practices and have a policy in place. Then that we also try to ensure that the roles and responsibilities are very clear. And the last was to align institutional efforts and those of national and international best practices. So with that in mind, about the framework, we had, or rather, I identified the roles that different institutions should play at different level. So the first level you're seeing up here was the individual level, that at the individual level as researchers, there were some things we need to do. Librarians in those universities, there were individual activities they needed to do, and the ICT officers, there were individual activities they needed to do. That is, the researchers are the ones creating the data. Librarians ought to support them in metadata and other support services, and ICT to provide infrastructure to security and the likes. Then level 2 was the institutional level. The roles at the institutional level. The research office should put in place policy. Library and ICT department should jointly support and put in place infrastructure. And the last units was the individual faculties or the centers where the researchers belong. At the national level, those 3 bodies have identified our key bodies that I think they have a key role in assisting universities start to manage their data. That's NACOSTI, and I'm happy I've seen my colleagues from Kenya here, so they are more familiar with this. And NACOSTI to establish the standard, Commission to integrate RDM in the quality assurance, and lastly, the Office of Data Protection to ensure that RDM practices comply with the national data privacy laws. So those were my main findings from the 3-leveled research. But then the question is, what are the implications of this to open education resources? And I argue that we need to improve our data management practices, and if we don't, our institutions or the globe at large will not be able to reap the full benefits of AI revolution. And number 2, that they will continue to have poor quality education resources. If we have good, clean data from research institutions, then they will inform or support the quality of research that is happening in our universities. Number 3, reduce discoverability and visibility of education content. Effective research data management improves visibility and discoverability of our research output. And then number 4, loss of institutional and national asset, knowledge asset. As I've said, research data is the most valuable intellectual asset today. If we don't manage it, we are going to lose it. So as we continue collecting our research data, kindly let's try to manage it as effectively as possible. Then we are likely to have weak collaboration and limited sharing. And last but not least, we are also likely to see to replace on the initiatives like what GoGN is trying to do to have education open. We are likely to replace if we don't put in place effective data management. So my call to action, unless research institutions, and in this case, universities, I want to believe most of us are affiliated to universities in one way or another where we are doing our studies. Unless universities don't strengthen their research data management systems, open educational resources, efforts towards open educational resource will remain weak, inconsistent, and less impactful. And therefore, I'm asking that we need to strengthen RDM system in our institutions. We need to advocate for an openness or a culture of openness in research. We need to capacity build the researchers and all the stakeholders involved in research. And last but not least, we need to think of sustainable strategies of these initiatives. How are we going to ensure that the movements like GoGN, COHEC Hub, and all those that are trying to promote open education or research, open research data management, how are they sustainable? Then in conclusion, in my presentation, I argue that high quality data is the fuel that powers meaningful open data. And therefore, all of us, as we continue with our research at different levels, we need to ensure that we keep and maintain high quality data. Without strong RDM framework in place, the quality of open educational resources will continue to be compromised. Number three, that investing in RDM systems will enable institutions to benefit from the AI-driven education landscape that we are in today. In our institutions today, we are interacting with AI natives. They have been born when AI is in place, and therefore, they might want to learn the AI way. They might want to be supported with the AI. But then we need to invest in proper data management system that will power this AI learning landscape. Last but not least, to advance open education resources, universities must treat data as a strategic institutional asset and commit to sustainable RDM practices. Thank you very much. I appreciate those my supervisors who journeyed with me in my studies, those who have supported me in data collection, and most importantly, open education champions, including GoGN, COHEC Hub, and all other collaborators that have supported me along the way. I've listed there my 4 publications from the thesis and one that is pending. You can check them out. And thank you very much. I was happy to see tuko pamoja. Asante sana. Thank you.